Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to Adapting Your Open Enrollment to Today's Workforce. My name is Ceci Spear. I'll be your host today. And we have our expert Amanda and Miston on the line as well. So jumping right in, welcome to our webinar. Two housekeeping items before we start. Some good news, you are all on mute. I promise none of us can hear you. So if you are munching on some yummy loud food, don't be worried. This is not coming through. Then our most asked questions. We will be posting these slides and you will have access to them. After today's presentation, you'll receive an email from me with links to the slides, a recording of this webinar, as well as a blog with some notes on what we covered today. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we divided the webinar into first parts. First, we're going to talk about schedule and prep, followed by configuration, then communication and reports, and finally finishing up with testing and practicing. If you do have any questions during our presentation today, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I'll see your question come in and ask it out loud at a good stopping point. We are going to do things a little different this time, so we'll have two presenters. I'll be working with Amanda to present some information that's in my area of expertise, which is around communication strategy. Since a lot of people have transitioned into working from home, communication is especially important this year. And what you've done in the past might not be an option now. Presenting the information to your team that is at home might look a little different, but that doesn't mean it has to be any less effective. So I'll be covering some tips and tricks as we go along. If you joined us last year, you remember Amanda. She's our open enrollment expert with over 15 years of progressive payroll experience, as well as HIRS design, testing, and implementation. Other than open enrollment, she's a tenured subject matter expert in the area of HR and payroll. Amanda has worked with companies of all sizes and unique requirements and has a thorough understanding of what the must-have aspects are for a successful open enrollment. Unfortunately, this year we weren't able to meet with our entire team, which is when we usually get our professional headshots taken. So Amanda and I decided to give you a glimpse into our real lives. So that's me on the left with my husband and our dog as we were getting ready to watch the very first Vanderbilt basketball game of the season. Unfortunately, that was also the season when they did not win a single SEC game, and the season we decided to buy season tickets. So that was a lot of fun. But anyway, right under my picture is my contact information should you have any questions. Now, without any further ado, it's all yours, Amanda.
Thank you, Ceci. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. For those of you who may have worked with me a lot or even just a little, you probably know that my greatest passion, even over UltiPro, is rescuing dogs. The picture that you're seeing on the right is my family. It's from a professional photo shoot with a pet photographer that we did before we left Colorado. So that's beautiful. Pikes Peak in the background for any of you who know Colorado or are mountaineers. And of course, my husband and myself, and my rescue monsters in the front. So it's Bowie Tatertot, who is the boss, in case you couldn't tell from her pose, and Jackson on the right. I could spend hours this whole webinar talking about those three, but we'll focus on open enrollment instead. So, as Ceci stated, I am the Senior Premier Support Consultant here at Mosaic. I've been here for about 5.5 years with heavy focus on open enrollment pretty much each year. One item to note is that today's webinar is for core open enrollment. So if you're currently using Benefits Prime for open enrollment, some of this information may not apply to your organization, but you're more than welcome to stay and learn and ask questions. Also, if you attended our webinar last year, you'll notice some repeat information today, but we have expanded on it to make sure we go over the critical items for open enrollment. As most of you probably know, open enrollment seems to surprise us every year, even though we know it's coming. So even if you've heard some of this information before, it's definitely valuable to go over it again because it has been a little while. So we are going to jump right into part one, which is schedule and preparation. For open enrollment, the team that you want on your open enrollment team should include an HRIS or system administrator, benefits administrator, payroll administrator, and testers. Your system admin will be there to configure the business rules if necessary, any new benefit plans or changes to benefit plans, and they'll help configure the actual open enrollment session or sessions. Your benefits administrator, you'll rely on that person to confirm the benefit start dates for the new plan year and stop dates for the current plan year. Your payroll administrator is there to help confirm pay period dates for both the current and the new plan year. We'll cover testing in more detail in a few minutes, but testers will run through scenarios in open enrollment when you're in test status to ensure that all the information is accurate. They'll basically act as your employees to enroll while the session is in that test status.
Cool. I think that makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you a quick question, though, Amanda. When you're listing these roles, do you envision an individual person for each role?
No, not at all. One person can act as multiple roles on the team. So, for instance, your benefits administrator might also be your payroll administrator. It really depends on how your organization is set up. So, when you're designing your open enrollment team, it's most important to consider the roles your team play as opposed to having one person per role that's listed on the slide.
Right. And I totally agree. And it kind of goes with what I wanted to say in terms of putting your team together. When you're thinking about who and how you will present this information to the broader audience, there are a couple more roles to consider. At Mosaic, we hold a presentation that goes over the benefit plans and options for our team. And I'm here to recommend you do the same thing. The presentation will ensure that people pay closer attention than any sort of written communication can really provide. So Mosaic has had a remote team since inception, so we are used to this. Our team is kind of all over the U.S., and we're used to presentations online. But throughout today's presentation, I'm going to discuss some of the options that you have when it comes to software to do these presentations. But for now, the most important thing for you to think about is the people who are actually going to be doing these presentations. You can think about people's innate strengths and weaknesses. If you have someone on your team who's very charismatic, use their natural charisma as a presenter. They're a great person to have be your presenter. Sometimes people who are naturally charismatic can have a harder time focusing on details, though. So it might be good to have someone who can back them up as a subject matter expert and who can answer any questions that your team has. That's not to say that your presenter can't also be your subject matter expert, but just consider, like Amanda was saying, to have these roles filled. See if anyone on your team has the desire to do this, and make sure they understand how important the presentation will be before you assign the task. This presentation to the broader team must be engaging and informational, but it's important to start thinking about these things now so you can start planning for them and so your team can get comfortable with their assigned roles. So speaking of planning, let's move on to scheduling.
So for open enrollment, having all parties present during the initial configuration, during testing is pretty critical. Once you have your team, you'll need to think about your schedule. So many companies hold open enrollment in October or November. That allows plenty of time for vendor file feeds to go out and get approved. That gives the vendors plenty of time to get the benefit cards issued to employees prior to the start of the new plan year. You can also hold an off-cycle open enrollment. At Mosaic, for example, we have open enrollment in July. And if you want to learn more about off-cycle open enrollment, please visit our blog and you can find that information there. One of the things for scheduling that COVID-19 has impacted is many employees are being furloughed or having their hours reduced because of COVID-19. So some clients are configuring special open enrollment sessions for their employees other than the plan year start. And that allows the employees an opportunity to change their enrollments due to a reduction in hours. That's completely dependent on your organization, but it is something that we like to point out. We have seen that quite a bit this year. So I think that's it for my point. Ceci, what are your thoughts on scheduling?
Yeah, it's a good question, Amanda. And once you define all the super important stuff that you were going over about when open enrollment will happen and how long you want to keep it open, you should move on to scheduling the informational presentations we were talking about. So we recommend holding multiple presentations during different days and at varying times. This is because we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to attend. There's always PTO, sick days, or meetings in the way of other meetings, or maybe someone has to pick up or drop off their children at the same time every day. So it's important to hold these meetings at varying times and on different days. Also, please don't forget to think about people on other shifts and when they will be able to attend. At Mosaic, we have about 90 employees, and we hold 3 meetings over 10-ish days. The good news is, though, that it's not entirely up to you to invite every single person to a meeting that they can attend. You simply invite the broader team to every presentation, and then you give them a choice to which one to attend. We'll cover this again during our communication section, but make sure that you tell your broader audience and you remind them that all the presentations will be the same and that they only have to attend one of them. One quick question for you though, Amanda. How long do you usually see people keep their open enrollment sessions open?
Most of my clients have their session open for 2 full weeks to allow the full employee population time to complete their enrollments. Some I've even seen 3 weeks, but 2 is kind of a general rule. Definitely don't want to do anything less than that if you can help it.
Cool. Well, keeping that in mind, I think it's a good idea to have your first presentation on the very first day of open enrollment and try to have the last one with at least 2 or 3 more days left so that everyone can go straight from your presentation into the system. But they also have a couple of days in case they need to think about something that you've presented or they need to discuss anything with their family. Since you are trying to get a lot of people to be able to attend one of your presentations, you want to get these on their calendar as early as you can. And once they're on the company calendar, try as hard as you can not to change them and allow people to kind of commit to one of those and stick to their plan. So moving on to kind of specific software options that you have, I personally recommend the purchase version of Zoom. There are a couple of reasons for that. The first one being that you can use the webinar option when scheduling your meeting. You'll need to talk to the person that's in charge of your Zoom contract within your company who manages that. That person might be in your IT department. But the Zoom webinar function is what we're using today. And it can be set up to have some really cool features, like it automatically records the presentation into the cloud. It automatically mutes everyone who isn't a presenter. And it also allows you to run reports that we're going to talk about a little bit more today. If you do not have the licensed version of Zoom, you do still have other options. So you can use the free version of Zoom, keeping in mind that your presentations will only be allowed to last 40 minutes because it will cut you off and drop everyone off of your call after 40 minutes. If your company uses Office 365, you could consider looking into Skype or Microsoft Teams, which are both included with 365. And the difference between these 2 products and Zoom is that Skype and Teams are really meant to be internal communication tools. So if you already use them, they're a great option. I think Zoom is significantly more user-friendly, and it allows you to set up a meeting without the other person really having to do much. All they really need is that link. They might have to download something to access the meeting, but Zoom makes it pretty easy to join and stay in meetings. If you don't already use a communication system, Zoom is really the way to go. But if you and your team are used to a different type of system like Skype or Teams, feel free to stick with that. Use whatever is your team's already used to. I think that's it for scheduling, Amanda. Let me check and make sure that we have all of our audience questions covered. Okay, I think we're good to move on to our toolkit. So take it away.
All right, so the Open Enrollment Rollout Toolkit is really designed to be used months before the Open Enrollment live session. So if you haven't already, I definitely recommend getting your Open Enrollment team to review it and getting started as soon as possible. You'll find all sorts of cool stuff. There's guided tours, there's quick casts, they have checklists and a lot of reports that help to help you with a successful open enrollment. It'll also walk you through post-open enrollment activities such as the stop date utility, if you've heard of that before. You'll find the toolkit on the Customer Success Portal Learning Center. It contains a lot more information than we can review together today, but a few examples that I pulled are the open enrollment timeline, and that is an all-inclusive 6-month timeline for successful open enrollment implementation. Also the open enrollment checklist for UltiPro benefits. That is one that I download every single year and use it on every open enrollment. It'll guide you through 7 phases of open enrollment from planning to post-open enrollment. And the checklist includes learning resources for your open enrollment team. Another one that I really like is called Top Tips for Achieving a Smooth Open Enrollment. Some of those tips include planning your open enrollment early. You're attending this webinar, so you definitely have a jump start on that. It includes designating a project team and creating a project plan, which we've covered, and completing the pending effective date worksheets, testing your open enrollment session to ensure the configuration is correct and everything is functioning as expected. Again, those are just a few of the top tips that I pulled out today. The pending effective date worksheet is critical. We'll definitely go into more detail on that worksheet in a few minutes. Lastly, the toolkit includes an open enrollment rollout poster. So if you don't have one that you currently use for your open enrollment sessions, like Ceci has been talking about, you can download that template for the announcement to your employees, updating it with your own company information. So it's a pretty cool thing. So again, that's found in the toolkit as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. Our next section is on configuration, and I believe this is all you, but I'll be sure to interrupt you if there are any questions.
Okay, sounds good. Before you begin configuring your session or sessions, if you have multiple, it's really important to review and update any business rules that affect open enrollment. So some of these are your deduction benefit groups. You want to make sure that all of your groups contain all applicable plans that are going to be used in the open enrollment sessions. Deduction benefit types, so that includes medical, dental, vision, the actual types of plans that you have. The thing with the benefit types is there's one flag that's called Allow Multiple Deductions flag. That's pretty critical. You definitely do not want to change that after open enrollment is configured. If you do change that flag on any deduction type in UltiPro, it will affect the decline settings in open enrollment. So those may not be what you initially configured. So definitely want to take a look at that prior to configuring your sessions. Deduction benefit plans, you want to make sure all of your plans are configured correctly. Any rate changes are included if you've had those. Any new plans, if you've had vendor changes, things like that. You want to make sure all of those are set up. Benefit options are employee only, employee plus one, employee and family, things like that. Relationships and decline reasons are also two that I try to take a look at just to see if there's anything that needs to be updated. That'd be benefit change reason, I'm sorry. And then for configuration, before you configure anything, you're going to want to fill out the pending effective date estimator. So you can download this from the Learning Center as well. As you enter your benefit groups and dates on this file, you want to think about it as a stoplight. So red means stop and green means go. What will happen is as you're entering the dates for your deductions and your plan years, the cells will automatically turn green or red as you enter the information for each group. So if you're typing things in and you see any cells automatically highlighted in red, that most likely means that the combination of dates that you've entered won't work for your various benefit groups. So in that case, what you'll need to do is download or save another copy of the worksheet and complete it for the separate groups until you get all green cells. The pending effective date is critical for core open enrollment. It's used for effective dating rates in open enrollment, for example, health and dental. And it's also the date your employees are going to be able to view their new elections in UltiPro. Due to the nature of the date and how much it affects in your open enrollment session, once that pending effective date is configured, any changes to that date will cause the contents of the session to be deleted. So if you do decide you don't want to use the date you initially entered, and you change that date, you're going to have to reconfigure everything in the session. One recommendation, when possible, if you do have a benefit plan year that's January through December, we recommend using a pending effective date of 01/01 of the new plan year. If you have any HSA or FSA plans that are using the year in the tax category, for example, Flexible Spending Account 2021, you won't be able to show any new maximum limits in the open enrollment session if that pending effective date is prior to the first of the new year. So that's one reason. The second reason that I've encountered quite a bit is that the confirmation page, when your employee gets to the very end of their open enrollment session, it will show that the new plans are effective as of the pending effective date. So dates other than 1/1 can tend to confuse employees. And then lastly, we recommend a 1/1 date for ACA purposes. If the employee's lowest cost is changing, an effective dated record of 1/1 is needed for ACA. An update from the spring release in 2019 now gives us the option to copy open enrollment sessions in Core, which is very, very nice. If your current year's sessions will be the same or close to the same as last year, you can actually copy last year's session and from there make any date changes, deduction group changes, or any plans that have changed. It was one of the main items I think that customers asked Ultimate for, and it proved to be very, very useful last year. When you're configuring your sessions, you want to think of the SMART goal philosophy, and that is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based. One example that I try to use for most of my clients is the messaging that's in the open enrollment session. You don't need to include every detail of the plan document in open enrollment messages. You want to keep your messages informative but simple, and you want to include links to your full plan document. So if your employees do have questions beyond what you have in your messages, they can click on the links and be taken to the places that they need to go to get the information they're looking for. There are two types of open enrollment, active and passive. Mosaic recommends active, as that will require employees to re-elect their benefits, even if your company doesn't have any plan changes or if the employee doesn't wish to make changes in their coverage. But if you do have any plan changes, vendor changes, any new deduction plans, things of that nature, active would absolutely be the way to go. Some of my clients choose passive because it works better for them. There's three main items to consider when you're deciding between active and passive. Open enrollment does not work on UltiPro mobile app, so you want to keep that in mind if you do have a population of employees who don't have access to a computer or may not be able to log in through the web login on their phone, or if you have single sign-on. Benefits administrators can enroll on behalf of employees, but that can definitely be a burden on the benefits team if they have to do that for multiple employees. It's not one size fits all, so you definitely want to consider your specific benefit plans and your specific employee population. One item that I always bring up every year is that due to IRS regulations, flexible spending accounts require an active session. The IRS mandates that employees actively enroll in FSA every year. So if you do choose passive for your other benefits, it's generally best to configure a separate session strictly for FSA. If you don't want to have two different sessions, you want to keep everything together, it will require an active enrollment for all benefits and all employees. Lastly, you should take into consideration any organization changes that have happened as a result of COVID-19. If your benefits team, for instance, is working from home, employees can no longer just pop in to ask a question about open enrollment. So if that's the case, a passive open enrollment may be the better option for this year.
Yeah, I think we talk about active versus passive every year, and I think it makes sense for everyone to really consider their options this year since so many things have changed. Thanks, Amanda. Okay, so section 3 is communication and reports. So let's start by defining the communication tools that I think will make it easy for you to ensure your team is all on the same page when it comes to their open enrollment. Here is a list of documents that I would consider putting together. This is kind of like a Sudoku though, where you can start with any of them that might seem like low-hanging fruit, and that'll let you move on to the next one a little bit easier. The first one I wanted to talk about, we already kind of mentioned, is that invitation. This can be a calendar invitation or something printed like the template that Amanda mentioned. A huge supporter of the invitation though is the reminders. There's a rule of thumb that if you say something 7 times, that'll actually ensure people will remember it. I'm not saying that you should send the same exact reminder 7 days in a row, but you should just kind of think about different ways to get the information to your team. Send the invitation to your informational presentations, then remind your team on your team Slack channel, or if you do a monthly newsletter or all hands and all company meetings. Use any tool that you have at your disposal to communicate this information. It's really important stuff, and I've never heard someone complain that their employer over-communicates. So say it and say it often. You're not bothering people by reminding them of this. At Mosaic, we also have 2 documents that we use during open enrollment and during orientation. The first one is a benefits at a glance document that lists all of the benefits that we offer in a summarized description for each. We also have an FAQ document. And for this FAQ document, what I would recommend is you use the collective knowledge of the people who are on your open enrollment team. They've probably gone through this process before. What are the questions that they usually ask, that they usually answer? What are the questions that they get asked every year? Like Amanda said, right? People won't be able to come into your office and ask questions this year. So try to answer them before they even come up. Another thing to consider is the actual slides that you'll use in your presentation. Keep your slides simple. Slides are supposed to be a supporting tool to your presentation. Don't fill them with words. When you do that, it really only distracts people and they'll read the words instead of listening to what you're saying. List important information on each slide and don't read them. Just use it as a visual aid for the information you want to present. Also, use the slides to be very, very, very clear on who your team should contact if they have any questions. Start off your slideshow with that information and end it in the same way. You can even do what Amanda and I did at the beginning with a picture of us at the top. That helps people remember where to find the contact information. But above all, remember that the slides are really not meant to stand alone. They should always be accompanied by a voice. And speaking of that voice, make sure to record your presentation so that people can access the information in case they need reminders or they just kind of want to find that little piece of information again. They can go back to the recording. And if someone missed or wasn't able to attend any of your presentations, that recording will be there for them. After your presentations, though, make sure to follow up. Send your team the recording, the presentation printout, and any information on who to contact if they have additional questions. That's a good time to also send the FAQ document or any other supporting documentation that you put together. The most important thing about communication with a remote team is to be proactive, communicate a lot, and stay open. The last thing I would consider is holding office hours. These can be set up in a couple ways. You can schedule any time between, let's say, noon and 5 and invite people to schedule time with you to ask you questions, or you can just kind of keep a Zoom line open for a few hours, for a few days, but during that open enrollment season. And then this will allow people to come in and out and ask you questions. It's kind of the virtual version of that pop-in that we've been talking about. This will really help your team feel supported. They'll be able to ask any questions that they have on their own kind of personal choices, but it'll also make sure that they feel like they have someone to go to, feel that they're being heard. In short, if I had to summarize my whole message for today, it's to be proactive. Think about all the questions your team might have and try to answer them as best as you can. Being prepared with answers is a really easy way to ensure that your project team is on the same page, but also that all your communication goes smoothly and your team has a really good open enrollment experience. Okay, I think that's all I have in terms of assets you may want to prepare when you start thinking about open enrollment and things that you can kind of start preparing now. Amanda, let's move on to reports that'll keep our audience informed.
Okay, there are tens, if not hundreds, of UltiPro delivered reports that can be used during open enrollment. They have, in the open enrollment gateway, there's some reports. They have standard reports and they have custom BI reports. Sorry, they have BI reports that can be used during planning, configuration, and definitely during testing phases just to make sure that your reporting needs are going to be met for this year's open enrollment. if the delivered standard and BI reports are not sufficient, you'll want to reach out to your Mosaic consultant to discuss development of custom BI reports that you might need. And definitely, if you already have custom reports in BI, you want to make sure you review each report to ensure all the data is present and correct. It includes any reports for vendor file feeds if those are designed in BI. That's kind of rare. For those of you who are familiar with Cognos reports, you know that they're not usually an overnight fix. There's definitely no easy button when it comes to Cognos, especially when it comes to benefit reports. So getting a jump start on all open enrollment reporting needs is absolutely crucial.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Can you give me some examples of custom BI reports that you've developed for your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. Mostly I've done audit reports, and there's actually a kind of a generic screenshot on the slide here that we're looking at. The side-by-side report that's delivered from Ultimate is one that I think pretty much every client uses each year. The delivered report shows an employee's current benefits along with what they've elected in open enrollment. So the administrator running the report or whoever's viewing the report can see what's going to be changing on a deduction type level or by employee. The delivered report doesn't contain all data such as I believe the option rates and the benefit amount. So I've customized that report for 3 clients, I think, in past years. And as far as auditing, I've also developed many full benefits reports for clients that are, some of them are even emailed to the employees after open enrollment or after the start of the plan year as a final confirmation of their elections for the upcoming plan year.
Awesome. Well, real quick, speaking of reports, Zoom also offers reports. So if you have the full licensed version of Zoom and you schedule these presentations, like I mentioned, as webinars, you will be able to run reports on who attended, for how long, and what questions were asked via the chat. And those questions are the really important thing that I want to talk about today. My high school math teacher always said, if you have a question, someone else in the class is probably wondering the same thing. So keep track of the questions asked by your team. You should look for any patterns that may indicate that your presentation has a gap and fill it before your next presentation. If you are not using Zoom, I would still recommend that someone on your team keep track of the questions that are asked and also try to search for those patterns just to make sure that you're answering those questions for everyone on your team. It goes back to being proactive and keeping your team on the same page. So in order to see these reports, if you are using the webinar function in Zoom, you'll log into your Zoom profile. You will have to be an administrator of Zoom to do this. So you might have to talk to someone in your IT team or whoever is an admin of Zoom. But you log into Zoom, and on the left-hand side, you'll see the account management button. And then, so you'll click on that, and it'll take you to a second section that you can click on Reports. And once you click on Reports, you can click on the webinar report, and it'll give you this information that we were going over, where you'll be able to see who attended, for how long, and the questions and answers that were provided. Okay. So finally, everyone's favorite part to skip, but honestly, 2 really, really, really important things to do and do well in order to ensure a good and smooth process: testing and practice.
I think my clients that I've worked with on open enrollment probably are sick of hearing me say the word test, because I stress it so much when we do open enrollment every year. It's actually a really cool feature of open enrollment that after you've configured your open enrollment session, you can test the open enrollment to make sure that the employees are going to experience what you expect them to experience. So again, it's making elections from an employee's point of view. During testing, you can verify that the session is configured correctly, that all business rules are configured, that all pages include helpful information. You can do all of that prior to your session window, prior to your employees actually going in to enroll. You want to test every session if you have multiple. You want to use a broad range of employees, one from each deduction group, one exempt employee, one non-exempt. One of my clients has more than 10 sessions each year because they have pay frequencies and pay dates all over the place. So every year they have a team specifically designated for testing. one person on the team for each different session that they need to configure that year. Their team consists of administrators who are not involved in the configuration process, so they haven't seen any of this before, haven't been involved in any of the discussions. And in the past, they've caught incorrect rates on deduction plans and incorrect messaging to employees, for instance. If possible, specifically if you have a test environment with UltiPro, I would try to have a handful of employees test your open enrollment. Benefit administrators, they know different things than the employee does. For instance, we may call it FSA, but do all employees know that that stands for Flexible Spending Account? Employee testers can also click on all links and read all messages to ensure that those are accessible and that they make sense from the employee point of view. Keep in mind during testing there may be some pending compliance updates that have not been applied to the system yet. The FSA annual limit specifically, that will be applied by Ultimate, but obviously cannot be done until the IRS states the limit. You can still configure, you can still test, and you can still go live with open enrollment prior to that update being applied to UltiPro. Ultimate has it, they will set the correct amount once they get it. And then one really important thing, which is in the checklist when you're going through your checklist, is you want to be sure to reset your test selections prior to go live, or those tests can actually be posted to employee records.
I really know what you mean, Amanda. I used to work on an app, and whenever we came out with a new version, we would ask our testers to try to break the app so that we could be sure that everything was working once the clients finally had it. But quick question, can you tell me what can happen if we do not test the session?
Yeah, a lot of things are uncovered during testing. Plan contingency issues are a big one. What that means is that employees need to be able to, they need to enroll in a high deductible a high deductible medical plan in order to be able to enroll in HSA. So if those aren't configured correctly, that can be uncovered. I've seen incorrect deduction types being used or deduction plans. One thing I can think of is that one of my clients last year or the year before had a vendor change, so they configured a new medical plan in UltiPro, and they were so used to using the old plan that that's what they configured in open enrollment, and one of their testers actually caught it. It went through literally planning all the way up to testing before somebody caught it, and one of their testers recognized that it was the old plan instead of the new. A lot of errors in messaging. That's why I recommend keeping your messages as simple as possible, but also having your testers edit all messages with a fine-tooth comb and clicking on every link that you have in there to make sure the employees are taken to the correct websites or documents and have all the right information.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So moving on to practicing. You're ready, your documents are prepared, your presentation is looking good. The last thing you have to do, and you do not want to skip, is to practice, and then practice a little more. I know that it seems silly, but sit down in front of a mirror and practice. Make your partner or your pet or someone listen to you. I know my dog hears every single presentation that I do at least 5 times. She could probably do this webinar instead of me. But practicing out loud is just so important. People naturally believe that if they put the presentation together or they had something to do with putting the presentation together, that they can just wing the speaking part. But I promise that you'll be so happy that you spent the time practicing. Say the words you want to say multiple times. You'll notice crazy things like words that you use as a crutch to get you to a different word, or you'll notice that you might have a hard time pronouncing a word. And if you practice, you might be able to find a different way to say the same thing. You'll also notice with practicing the flow of your presentation and whether or not you need to move stuff around just so that it makes a little more sense. The difference between an okay presentation and a really great fun one is the confidence in the presenter. You can be an expert, but if you stumble on your words or forget what you want to say, or if you go on tangents because you aren't really sure what the point is of the specific slide you're on, or you mention something because you forgot that it was going to come up later and then it does come up, you'll really lose your audience. And this is especially true when your audience is remote and they can't see you. I promise the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll be with the words and the content. I know that when I get nervous, I talk way too fast and my voice can get a little crackly. When I practice, I know the parts where I can pause and breathe and avoid the crackly voice, and it helps me stay confident because by the time it's live, I've already done it. You know this stuff. You don't need to be worried, and you've done it before because you've practiced. Think about how you're going to present when you're practicing. If it's in a conference room with people, practice in that conference room. One great thing that we started doing here at Mosaic came from the book, The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, which I highly recommend. It's a really quick read, and although I know none of us want to be as controlling as he was when he came to presentations, one thing he did really well was that he always practiced the presentations in the location when they were going to be held. He did dress rehearsals. So we started doing that here at Mosaic, and we even record our dress rehearsals to make sure that when the presentation happens, we already have a recording, and it also really pushes the presenters to practice once and practice fully.
I think my 3 dogs could also do today's presentation because they've heard it so many times, so that would be really interesting to get the 4 of them together to do the presentation. I'll ask you a similar question to what you asked me on testing, but do you have any examples that you have seen as a result of not practicing the presentations?
I have, and I mean, a lot of my examples are like I've seen experts present something and not seem like experts because they're just not confident because they haven't opened the presentation in a while. Sometimes people get overconfident and it's a presentation that they've done a lot of times, and then when they open it, they realize that something changed and they didn't know. I've seen people get completely paralyzed because they've never practiced the material and something they weren't expecting to happen happens, like they can't see their notes or they're unable to play a video. I think we've all kind of seen people get stumped. The worst example I can think of, though, is director Michael Bay. And if you want to watch something funny for a second, it's kind of cringy, but if you Google Michael Bay things on YouTube, you'll see a video where, you know, he goes up in front of a ton of people. And this is a very famous director who has all the reasons in the world to feel confident. He goes on stage in front of thousands of people, and he's supposed to talk about the Samsung TV. Well, he comes on, he starts talking, and he is completely thrown off because the teleprompter isn't working. He just looks at the other person on the stage, apologizes, and just walks off stage. He literally just walks because he can't move on because of a technology glitch. I think that if he would have prepared, if he would have read what the teleprompter was trying to get him to say before, he would have been able to move on. You know, he would have been able to do the presentation even if it wasn't word for word. If you know your information backwards and forwards, you don't need slides. Technology can fail, but you'll still be able to get your points across. So practice, practice, and then practice a little bit more. And I think that's it, Amanda. I'm going to open the floor for questions. I have the first one, though. It came through. How do we know which date to pick for pending effective date if 0101 isn't going to work?
Yeah, it's a great question. The pending effective date estimator worksheet will give you a date range that you can use. So it'll have a minimum pending effective date and a maximum pending effective date. So you can choose a date within that range. You'll want to consider your effective date for rates and when you want employees to be able to see their enrollment elections on their benefit record in UltiPro when they log in.
Awesome. I think that makes a lot of sense. It looks like there's no other questions, so we'll wrap up for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and please feel free to contact us if you have any questions.